Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Holl. Vinnie Cilurzo is my guest today, and we'll be talking all things Russian River, including Pliny the Younger, building recipes, and his hopes for hops. But first, I'm going to ask you to check out beeredge.com for articles, episodes of the podcast hosted by Andy Crouch, and to sign up for the newsletter. And don't forget the This Week in Rausch Beer Facebook page, where there is always something smoky going on. And if you'd like to learn about advertising on this show or the Beer Edge podcast, you can reach out to Liz Melby at liz@beeredge.com, and she'll tell you all about our exciting and affordable rates. And also be sure to follow us on most of the social medias. We're still not on TikTok, at The Beer Edge. A few weeks ago, Vinnie Cilurzo, who's a co-founder of Russian River Brewing Company in California, was on Steal This Beer, the podcast I co-host with Augie Carton. Amid the hop-soaked fun, Vinnie mentioned how the two breweries in the Russian River family, the one in Santa Rosa and the newer one in Windsor, talk between themselves to dial in recipes. And it's a fun conversation, and you should go back and listen to it if you haven't already. It's episode 300. And we didn't get too deep into it at the time about how these recipes kind of come together and the breweries talk to each other. And so over the course of the last few weeks, I've been emailing with Vinnie to learn more. And we finally decided to just record a podcast episode about how the beers are dialed in, evaluated, and tweaked over time. And we really nerd out, so get ready. And I would have done this sooner, but he was tied up with the 2021 launch of Pliny the Younger, the triple IPA that is released once per year, usually around this time, to great acclaim and often long lines. But because of the pandemic, the sales were moved into bottles and online, like the internet. And it was a learning experience for the brewery, especially with how many people wanted a chance to drink, or maybe trade, bottles of their own. And so that's where we start, with me asking about Younger Day and the aftermath. Vinnie spoke to me from the brewery in Windsor. Here's our conversation. We're speaking a couple of days after, I guess, the Younger pandemonium, is that a fair word to use, has died down?
Yes. Very fair word to use. Mayhem has been used quite a bit around here.
In what context? I mean, how has it been the last couple of weeks with Younger in a pandemic?
We did Pliny the Younger as an online release this year. We didn't want to do any in-person events here at the brewery. Didn't want to become super spreader events, if you will, even with just beer pickup. So we said online only. And when we brewed the Younger in early January, we had no idea that the governor was going to lift all of the outdoor dining restrictions that were, or the whole shelter in place, which also included outdoor dining. And so, in hindsight, if we would have known that, we could have possibly, brewed enough to do some draft distribution and do draft, but it obviously didn't work out that way. So we kept it as an online release. We had planned for around 8,000 mixed packs of 5 different beers. 4 of the 12 beers were Pliny the Younger in bottles. And, we knew it would be busy, but we had no idea that 110,000 people would be waiting at the doorstep of our website wanting to buy one of these 8,000 cases. Now, we had planned for people not being able to order duplicates. The e-commerce had bought software and whatnot, which, when you think about bots and beer, it's not really that common because there isn't much of a black market, whereas, a Metallica concert, for example, a bot could buy all these tickets and then, figure out a way that whoever is behind it could resell them. Well, that's a little more difficult with beer because of all the restrictions. So anyways, in the end, it all sold out in minutes, and we did have a lot of, upset customers who, had beer in their cart, and then it, we just ran out. And most e-commerce platforms don't give you a 5-minute or 10-minute window. It just puts what you order in the cart, and then it's kind of first come first serve, if you will. So
whoever gets
we
to
kind
the
of set
checkout
ourselves
first
up for a mess. But at the end of the day, we did get a lot of emails, and a lot of we were beat up quite a bit on social media. But Natalie and I take that on ourselves, and I responded to every email that came through the info at, or nearly everyone. Myself, I quickly had our IT director point the info at to my computer, and that's what I did for 3 days after. Obviously, if we could do it again, we would do it differently, or we probably wouldn't have done it at all. Next year, if so long as we're out of the pandemic, we'll go back to our normal Pliny the Younger in-person release, along with draft distributed all over the state. If we still are in a pandemic state, which, gosh, I hope we're not, we probably won't do anything at all and just wait for the pandemic to clear.
So that's the interesting thing, is that there's a lot of breweries, now that vaccines are being rolled out, there's a lot of breweries that are trying to figure out what business model or business pivot or whatever they did during the pandemic might become a regular part of their business after things get back to quote unquote normal. But it sounds like this won't be one of those things for you.
Not doing Pliny the Younger direct to consumer, but our normal direct to consumer, which we've been doing now for a year since the beginning of the pandemic, will stay and become a regular part of our business. In fact, one of our managers here at our Windsor Brewery restaurant, he actually moved into the direct to consumer role, manager role. So for the first 4 months of the pandemic, all I did was direct to consumer, and it was a huge deal for us, and really helped us out financially and kept a lot of people employed. And so Natalie and I had done direct to consumer at the beginning of our brew pub with just sour beers in a really, really small way. We both come from the wine industry, so we know that. We had started a direct to consumer program a few days before the governor locked down the state of California, so we were already ahead of most of the other breweries. There was only a handful of other breweries in California doing direct to consumer at that time, but it was very evident to us that this was going to be something that we needed to do. So for us, it's definitely going to stay apart. We do a lot of small batch releases in cans on direct to consumer, but at the end of the day, Pliny the Elder is still our top selling beer direct to consumer. Folks that say in Southern California, for example, where there's still it's hard to find, folks like the ability that they can just order a mixed pack that has Pliny and a few other beers, or just a 12-bottle case, and they have it in their fridge at home.
Yeah. You said you were caught by surprise by 110,000 people hitting the website. What would have been a reasonable number in your mind?
I don't know. I'm not sure I even picked a number in my head, but 110,000, you think about, a baseball stadium, and if it's packed that's like what, 40, 50,000 people?
Yeah.
And then you say that's twice, that I keep thinking about, Metallica is a local Bay Area band. So I think about them, they'll sell out the Giants baseball stadium, 2 nights in a row. And I'm like, okay, well, that's a Metallica concert twice. You know what I mean? It was just the sheer number of people just took us by surprise. So I don't know what I thought that number was going to be, but it definitely didn't think it was going to be 110,000 or even half that many. I didn't think it would be even 50,000. But then when you start drilling down into it, it wasn't just because we do only ship to California, but when you open it up and you look at it more broadly, you say, well, anyone that knows someone in California, they could have their beer shipped to a person in California, and then that person can turn around and ship it to wherever you live in America, New Jersey, Nebraska, whatever, fill in the state. So really it did end up becoming a national release. And so I guess we should have been a little more prepared for that. But, at the end of the day, we could only pack and print so many labels, shipping labels. And so, even if we would have done something different, there still would have been roughly 102,000 people that wouldn't have got the Pliny the Younger that they had wanted, unfortunately. And I did the math, 110,000, mixed packs worth of, that had, based on the 4 bottles of Pliny the Younger, that's 1,925 barrels of Pliny the Younger alone. We barely even have that much fermentation capacity, and that's 4 times as much Younger as we normally make in a year. Normally we make about 475 barrels a year. So, I mean, it would be a monumental amount of beer, and there's just no physical way we could have pulled that off, even if we knew it was going to be 110,000 people.
Yeah. I mean, It seems like this was sort of a fun experiment for you all, but are you eager to get back to the way that it was? I mean, because you had really sort of dialed in that process. Um,
Yeah, we're really eager to get back there. Gosh, we miss people so much. We just opened our two restaurants back up for outdoor dining yesterday,
hmm
and we had up to a 3 hour wait at one of our restaurants, and the other one was like an hour wait. And so I mean, it was just so good to see people, and people want to get out, and but they they're doing it safely, and we're doing it safely, and but yeah, we really miss people, and I really miss that younger experience. And yes, there's lines and whatnot, but people get a 3 hour table limit once they get inside, and it's just this very social experience. And Pliny the Younger in person isn't just about Pliny the Younger. Natalie and I always talk more like it's a Russian River experience. So I always put a new beer out or something different, and like this year in the mix pack, I even threw a new sour beer in that I called Funky Food or Cherry. It had never been
Oh.
released before, never been made before. I made it specifically for the younger release, and so it's something that will carry on. But so even so, the idea of behind the mix pack instead of only shipping Pliny the Younger was really because that's what the younger experience when you're doing it in person is about. You're trying all these other beers, and I make sure that we have other hoppy beers and other unique beers available.
Have you been monitoring? Have you all been looking at social media and seeing how far some of these bottles have already traveled outside of California?
Yeah, we have some of our team watches that, and yeah, they're definitely going pretty far, and they do, they obviously hit the black market. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we were so reluctant to start bottling Pliny the Younger. We finally did last year, 2020 release was the first time we bottled it, and it was because of that black market. But still at the end of the day, it's a minuscule percentage. So it's one of those things where are you going to let the bad apple ruin it for everyone else? Because the majority of people are enjoying the Younger and the ability to send it to a family member or friend who may not ever get the opportunity to come out and try it. So I try to keep a positive focus on it.
So with national listenership and actually international listenership on this show, if somebody does have a bottle right now, is there something that they can do at home? If they're planning on opening this in the next couple of days, uh, to sort of recreate that pub experience? Should you have other beers lined up as well, or is there a I don't know, is there an at home component that you hope people would take into consideration when drinking
It's an
younger?
interesting question because
That's why I'm here.
the real younger professionals, if you will, I'm air quoting, is they don't just like come in, hit the table, and let's say there's four people, and they're like, okay, four Pliny the Youngers, and our server will take the tab off their wristband. They actually start with the lighter beers and work their way up to younger. Younger is the only time that you can Pliny the Elder taste like water, and I mean this. Like when you drink a Younger first, and then you go back and drink an Elder, it literally tastes thin and watery. And then you go back to like Blind Pig or something that's even more mild. It's an IPA, but it's still more mild. Or you go to drink like Velvet Glow or Hellas or something. I mean, then it really tastes light. So the experienced Pliny the Younger aficionado actually starts with other beers, and whether someone has Younger at home and they have other Russian River beers, or they have other local beers wherever they're from. I would actually suggest, if you are going to drink some other beers, to not just start with Younger, though it is an experience though. And this year the recipe was pretty much the same as last, other than I added in a pretty new French hop called Elixir, and Elixir is bred from the same French co-op that I get our Aramis hops from for our STS Pilsner. And it's
Wh-
just this really berry forward hop with a little bit of pungent quality to it. I keep saying it's a little dirty in the aroma, but I mean that in a nice way,
Uh-huh.
and that it really lifts all the other hops in the beer, and melds in pretty nicely. And the Younger this year came out a little more hot, like alcohol hot in the aroma and flavor. So The elixir actually has been a nice hop to balance some of that heat.
That brings up an interesting question that I had of obviously when you package it and you get it out, you're working on somebody else's timetable. You know, you're working on San Francisco Beer Week or history or you know, when people expect it to come out. If it is a little hot, is this? Are you drinking it now, or are you letting it sit for another couple of days, another couple of weeks, or dealer's choice? What's your sense?
Yeah, I'm drinking it right now, and you know, because we had a very limited amount this year, and our yields were actually a little bit lower this year, so it's not like we had tons of extra cases sitting around.
Mm-hmm.
We have almost no extra. I am continuing to drink it right now because I do want to kind of have a mindset of how I'm going to adjust the recipe for next year, if any at all. And so I will make the adjustments to the next year's Pliny the Younger now, and then, you know, in a year from now when we go to brew, you know, what will be the 2022 Pliny the Younger release, I have to rely on my, you know, recipe changes and notes that I made, you know, right now. And so yeah, I'm drinking it because I do enjoy it. We did the other process change. We did a process change this year. We started the first dry hop in mid fermentation, so using some of this biotransformation mindset that is a big focus in some hazy IPAs and whatnot, and juicy IPAs. And so we've done mid fermentation dry hopping on Younger before, but never as early as we did it, and never with the quantity we did it this year. So we ended up with a bigger, brighter hop aroma. But again, that decision was made a year ago to do that, and just thinking again, tasting these new progressive IPAs and getting a feel for really what you can do in using mid fermentation dry hopping. And then through the year, through the pandemic, we made this beer called Pliny for President, where we double dry hopped Pliny the Elder.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing a lot of mid fermentation dry hopping in that beer, and so that just really solidified that I was gonna for sure do it on the Younger this year.
I like that. So, is there, when you start taking these notes now and thinking about next year, is there a temptation as brew day gets closer to say, well, what if we do this or what if we do that? Or like once you sort of lock stuff in now, does it remain untouched until next year?
It does remain untouched, but boy, did you like hit the nail right on the top of the head with the hammer. I mean, there is that temptation because, you know, we've never said that Pliny the Younger is a static, you know, recipe. That I've always believed it has to change a little bit each year. The foundation of it is still the same. The malt bill is still the same. But, you know, like there's no crystal malt in it anymore. There used to be a little bit. Now I add a little Munich for mouthfeel. You know, it's still main hops are Simcoe and Amarillo, but all the hops around it have changed over the years. We've honed it in. And there is a huge temptation to change it because, well, I mean, that's just how humans are. You know, you go and cook something in your kitchen and you always want to tinker with it to make it better, hopefully. And I'm the same way with my beer, but I do trust myself now, and you know we've been making Younger long enough, and I know the process. And I also think that that's like some of my winemaking background
Mm-hmm.
comes into help here, where you know being patient. And we only make this beer once a year, and I like that. I like that it only comes up. I like the challenge. It's a little stressful around here. You know, everyone's really happy once the last bottle or keg is filled, or the beer's in the serving tank. You know, just so that we know that at least it's done. The brewers have finished their job. But yeah, temptation's there to make the change, even though I made changes a year ago, but I don't do it. I really stick with my notes, and like I'll create a brew log for 2022. So I'll do a save as with our 2021 Pliny the Younger, and then turn the name into 2022, and then that's how I make my changes. And you know, I've got notes and stuff. And like this year, perfect example, like we did that all elixir. We did an all elixir beer. And so that was and I tasted beers with elixir over a year ago, and I really liked it. So that was how I added it in. But then for next year, for the 2022, I can already see that I used a little too much elixir, in my opinion. So I'll probably cut that dry hop quantity in half, and then take whatever the difference is and apply it to another hop variety that's in the dry hop.
So you were on Steal This Beer a couple of weeks ago, and listeners of both shows know that I usually don't like to cross guests or have guests too close one end or the other just for listener fatigue. But you brought up something on that show that I really wanted to mine a little bit deeper, and we just didn't have the time to. And that was reconciling recipes with both locations. So both the brew pub and then the Windsor location. And you and I had a couple of conversations on email about that leading up to it. But in that podcast, you were sort of talking about, how both breweries have to talk with each other and then talk to you to make sure that, especially when it comes to some of the iconic beers that you make, or the more well-known beers, that everybody is critically on the same page. And, having two different brew houses and two different systems and two different people in charge of those operations, I found it so interesting, this sort of coordination that comes. So I think we started talking about, if you, Vinnie, decide that you want to tweak something or change something with one of the recipes that's made at both locations, how does that process work? Where does that begin?
Yeah, so it normally is me. Neither of our lead brewers have the ability to just go in and make a change. All recipe changes have to flow through me, and a lot of that is because I do know our beer brands better than anyone else. But as much of anything as this is that, you just can't. Our Santa Rosa brewery just can't go start changing a recipe, whether it's an iconic beer like Pliny the Elder or another IPA, whatever it is, because it would have a direct effect on Windsor, our big production brewery, and then they suddenly wouldn't taste the same, because it's already hard enough to make these beers, taste the same, when our Santa Rosa brewery is this used, 20-barrel brew house that I bought from a defunct brewery in North Carolina in like 1993 or 2003, and then in Windsor we've got a hot rod. It's a German automated brew house, fully automated, that we put in about 28 months ago.
Yeah.
And so they're two totally different breweries. So it's really, really hard enough as it is. So I control all recipe development. If, one of our brewing team comes to, myself or one of the lead brewers or our production manager, Steven, and says, hey, what if we, did this to this recipe? We'll talk it through as our, kind of brewery management team. And if we were to want to make a change, it has to be made at both places. Now, if we want to test something, we would usually test it at the Santa Rosa brewery. If it turned out, maybe we'd release it, or maybe we would move that beer over to Windsor and blend it away. We now have a 5-barrel pilot brewery that we installed in the middle of the pandemic, so we have that now, and I brew on that myself. That's my little domain now. But the idea of recipe development, or trying to match recipes, I guess I should say, with the Windsor brewery started. You really can break it down to the 4 basic ingredients. Okay, water. Well, when Natalie and I had honed in on the area that we were going to build the Windsor facility, which was either going to be in Windsor or in North Santa Rosa by the Santa Rosa airport, first thing I did was start researching water. Well, it turns out that the water source is the same, and like literally get it from the same location. So I went to our friends that happened to be our neighbor behind us here, Dumal Winery, and I would go every quarter and pull a water sample. And the same day, we would pull a water sample at our Santa Rosa brew pub and our Santa Rosa, our old production brewery, and
Hmm.
we'd send them off for sampling. So we did that for a couple years, and then once we actually owned the property, started construction, we had water tapped here. I would just pull the water from the property here. So over that time, we learned that our water is like 98 to 99% identical in Windsor and Santa Rosa. So that's a huge,
Yeah, yeah.
huge, you know, component that you don't have to worry about. And then, you start looking at our hops. Well, okay, well, our hops are actually, Natalie and I go do hop selection every year. So they're the exact same lots of hops. Malt, it's the same malt. So we've always intertransferred the bulk malt from our silo, even at our old production brewery, to our brew pub. So that was always the same. But we took it even a step further here in Windsor. We have this fancy Kunsel brand malt handling equipment where the malt is drawn from a silo, super sacks, or a bag dump, but then it goes through a cleaning process where it removes all the dusk and the husks and any rocks and pebbles that might be in the malt, which you'd be surprised how much is in there. Someday I'll make a little pathway with all the rocks from that we remove. And
Is it
then
actually
normally
that
from there
much?
it
Like
gets
where you can
augmented.
actually do landscaping with it?
Oh yeah, it's crazy. I mean, pounds and pounds of, like, you've never seen malt when you pull a sample out of a bag, but it's in there. You just never see it. I mean, we have a whole bucket full of rocks that gets pulled out, and so that malt would then get fed to the grist case at our mill, but we have a drop where we can pull the malt for our pub. So in ProLight, our brewing software, not only do we have all the recipes for Windsor, but we have every Santa Rosa recipe in there, but it's only to pull the malt, and then we've got macro bins to take the malt over. So the malt is the same, and then usually our yeast, we use California ale yeast as our main primary fermentation yeast for our common beers that aren't funky, and those actually start normally in Santa Rosa and as a 20 or 40 barrel batch, and then we grow it, do a batch or two there and have enough to where we can then do a 75 barrel batch in Windsor, and then that 75 barrel yeast pitch can turn into a 300 barrel yeast pitch for a quadruple batch. So we are using all the same ingredients. So now you look at it and you say it's all equipment and process.
And everything goes through a lab, right? So you're getting reports on the beers regularly to actually show that you're hitting exactly what you want each and every time.
Yeah, we have a pretty elaborate QA and QC program, all the way from doing daily gravities to color, BUs. I know BUs aren't that as accurate anymore, but they can still be a marker for you to follow. We have a GC, a gas chromatograph, to measure diacetyl for VDKs for hop creep, to make sure that we're within spec there, because we have all kinds of trouble with hop creep with our yeast and our hop load. So yeah, we're a very analytical brewery, and it's something I'm really proud of. And the lab really is the kind of the brains of the whole operation, because everything that we do is focused on what the lab tells our brewing team. If a beer's a little behind on fermentation, they'll hold off on capping it. If the diacetyl, if the VDK is too high, we won't drop the temperature. We'll wait a little bit longer to let it reduce, to let the hop creep finish out.
Huh. Can you talk about hop creep for a second? Because I was having a conversation with Lou Bryson, the whiskey and beer writer, the other day, and he was having a tough time squaring his brain around hop creep, and I was trying to explain what I feel it is. But how does it present for you as somebody who drinks a lot of beers, where you're looking for it and then obviously trying to eradicate it?
And there's a lot of craft beer and a lot of homebrew out there that have hop creep. And I've been doing a lot of beer homebrew club Zoom events from all over the country, and a lot of times they'll send me their beer, and unfortunately a lot of homebrew has a diacetyl from the hop creep. But hop creep is basically caused by a secondary fermentation that happens in beers that are dry hopped and very heavy levels. So fill in the blank: IPA, American IPA, hazy IPA, West Coast, whatever. And basically there are enzymes in the hops that are basically reactivating during the dry hop process, or being activated during the dry hop process, and the residual long chain sugars that are typically unfermentable are getting broken down, and thus the yeast that is left in the beer is waking back up. It's coming out of dormancy, and it's starting a secondary fermentation, which is now lowering your gravity, making your beer drier. It's making more alcohol. If you don't let the beer sit long enough in the tank, and you go to bottle or can it or keg it, you can have that secondary fermentation in the vessel, and it could become a real issue and be a safety issue if your can or bottle explodes, and that has happened. The main flavor issue is that fermentation makes diacetyl, which is a buttery butterscotch
Yeah.
quality, and is what's showing itself. So put the that your beer is now out of spec from gravity and alcohol, but that diacetyl is a huge issue. And so here we are, in arguably the best time for beer and the most research has ever been done. And turns out this isn't a new thing. It was going on, 100 years ago. And when Allagash Brewery brought this to Tom Shellhammer at Oregon State University, Tom started doing some research and found that there was actually some writings about this back in England, except back then they called it the freshening power of hops, meaning that it kicked in a secondary fermentation. That's a lot more romantic than hop creep.
I was going to say
that's sound like
yeah. Those are like the old advertisements where the doctors were selling you cigarettes.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so that's what hop creep is. It's a huge issue. Some breweries have it worse than others. There's a lot of research being done at UC Davis and OSU on it. It's very yeast dependent. It's hop dependent. It's crop year dependent. It's dependent on where you're getting your hops from. It's probably always been going on, but it's in more recent times it's become worse because one, kiln temperatures have come down. The craft beer industry, mainly through the Hop Quality Group, has asked the hop growers to lower their kiln temperature, and then two, just the sheer quantity of hops we're adding. When I had my first brewery, Blind Pig, we did have a 2 pound per barrel dry hop beer, but our average beer was 1 pound our average IPA was 1 pound per barrel, and hops are being kilned at a warmer temperature. And now hops are being kilned at 125, 130 compared to 145 or 150, and we're dry hopping at absurd amounts. 2 pounds per barrel is pedestrian now. You got breweries doing 7-8 pounds per barrel dry hop alone.
I had the guys from Wren House Brewing in Arizona on the show just about a year or so ago, and they went for 13 pounds per barrel. So, which was a joke for a festival, but the line, it rivaled some of yours at festivals with how many people deep they were. So, people love.
Well, and the interesting thing about pounds per barrel at dry hop is an irrelevant number now, because there's also hop brokers are making what are called T45, T90 pellets, or the normal standard pellet. But a T45 is a concentrated pellet where a lot of the green material is removed, but you've left all the lupulin and oils and whatnot, so it's concentrated and doubled. So I mean, we make this beer Row 2 Hill 56. It's an all Simcoe beer. It's a Simcoe Pale Ale, and there we used to dry hop it at a pound per barrel. And now we've switched to what's called cryo, which is essentially a T45 pellet from Yakima Chief, one of our hop brokers. And so we're only dry hopping it now at half a pound per barrel. Well, in essence, it is a pound per barrel. It's just been concentrated down. So pounds per barrel of dry hop or use of hops is almost like BUs. It's an irrelevant number now, because they've come to understand, scientists have come to understand that, like, on the hop side, one alpha acid is different when it's a different, like when you have humulinones in the mix, which is oxidized alpha acids. Well, those humulinones are only like 0.6 or 0.7 as bitter as one alpha acid. So but at the end of the day, it is good to have these reference points in your recipes when you're brewing to know, that you are at least within reason of where you're supposed to be.
Yeah. That's just, I hadn't really been thinking about how people aren't talking about bitterness units as much as they were, but that certainly makes sense now.
I
Um,
think pounds per barrel is the new bittering units from like, 10, 15 years ago when everything was about BUs and whatnot. And, we're just as guilty of it at the time. We had BUs up on our chalkboard
yeah.
and we took it down years ago we have a hop chemist friend, and as she taught me more about, humulinones were the main thing that really were an eye opener to me. That are, like I said, they're oxidized alpha acids, and they can contribute to bitterness, and that's one of and dryness, and I always call it perceived bitterness, and that's one of the main components of of like a hazy IPA, and the bitterness that you get. It's not coming from a lot of times. It's not coming from isomerized alpha acids, like a conventional beer where the hops have been in the boil for an hour, hour and a half, but it's actually coming from hops from dry hopping.
Yeah.
But that's also like the great thing about beer is it's the art, it's the science, and you never stop learning, and researchers never stop, looking into these things and giving us brewers tools to hopefully create different beers and better beers and what have you.
I want to sort of we got off on a really fun tangent, so thank you, Professor, for that. But for that lesson within a lesson within a lesson. Um, but going back to when you are making changes, or the same beer is being brewed at different locations, and going back and listening to everything that you just said, from the water to the hops coming from the same lot to your yeast program and your lab reports and everything. Um, Now that you have these two locations, are there still customers that come to you and say, "Oh yeah, but Elder tastes better at Santa Rosa"? Like, do you
Yeah,
hear that? It's like that old Guinness myth of the best pint of Guinness you're going to have is in Dublin,
right.
which
Yeah, yeah,
strikes me as more romantic than anything else,
yeah, yeah.
or
Well, during
situationally aware.
younger
Yeah.
during younger when we started, in Windsor, people would line up and go to both breweries in the same day, and I would get emails and like, yeah, I like the Younger better in Santa Rosa. No, it was better in Windsor, and at the and I, what, I think it's fun. You can only adjust a recipe so much. And so over the last 28 months since we've had Windsor open, I will admit Pliny the Elder was very far apart early on, and we did a lot of blending early on. Now we've got them about as close as we can get. The one change that I would like to make in Santa Rosa would be to change our mill out without changing the whole brew house. I would like to change the mill to a four roller mill, maybe next year. It's on my wish list, which all has to be approved by Natalie.
Uh huh.
And that would, although it wouldn't mimic our wet mill in Windsor, where we're actually milling the malt in a moist water chamber, it would get us closer, and a wet mill just wouldn't be available in that small of a brewery on a 20 barrel batch size. But anyways. So you have to also accept that you can only go so far without change. Other than just changing the brew house out in Santa Rosa to a 20 barrel German brew house to be similar to this one. We can only go so far. And yes, customers do say that they like one or the other. And we've always been very open about it, though. And I've said bottles always come from Windsor. And when you're drinking anything, most beers on draft in Santa Rosa, though, that beer is being brewed there. Now we do comparison tastings, not often. I mean, less often during the pandemic because it's tough to get all of us in a room. But we do comparison tastings. There's a little bit of a competitiveness between the brewing team in Santa Rosa and the brewing team in Windsor, between our head brewers and lead brewers and whatnot. But for the most part, everyone's on the same page. It's like, okay, what can we do to make the beer better? And what's interesting is like our beer is way drier in Windsor, and the German brew house and German equipment made our beer better. So we're now actually trying to match Santa Rosa to Windsor, not the other way around. and we like, like I'll just tell you, like I still think Pliny the Elder is a little too dry coming out of Windsor, so we're working on how to tweak that recipe to finish just a little bit closer to 2.5 Plato instead of 2.1, which is where we're at now. And so, we'll make those same changes in Santa Rosa, but in Santa Rosa, it's so much easier to get to where we want to be on that old equipment, whereas the new equipment just wants to make drier beer. You talk to any brewer that has a wet mill, and it was Matt Brennelson that taught me this early on at Firestone, that when they switched to a wet mill, all their beers dried out. And I mean, aside from that, you get amazing extract. But anyway, so that was that's something that we're still playing around with, and we'll get there over time. I love how our beer is tasting right now, so I'm not in a huge hurry to do it. And another part of this is to not make a knee-jerk reaction and just keep making changes. Like, I'm a firm believer that if you're going to make a small tweak to a recipe, you do it, and then you live with that beer for a while and get to know it and drink it, take it home. Don't just drink it in sensory where you're maybe having an ounce, as if you were judging the Great American Beer Festival.
Yeah.
Pour it in a glass, drink a pint of it. What was Garrett Oliver's, like was it the 4-pint rule? Will you drink a beer 4 pints in a row?
Yeah.
And just being patient. Again, I think that goes back to my winemaking background, to not just make a tweak to a recipe every turn of it, to really live with it.
I'm mindful of your time, but you brought up the Hop Quality Group, and I know you were one of the founding brewery members of it, and it's obviously done a lot of good work to bring a better hop experience, not only for the growers, but obviously for the brewers, and then down to us, the consumers. What are you all focused on right now as we head into, as we're, I guess, still at the beginning of a new year?
Yeah, the Hop Quality Group is super strong right now. I mean, it started out with like 7 member breweries. I think it was Deschutes, Boston Beer, Sierra, New Belgium, New Glarus, Odell, Russian River, Firestone.
It's a pretty ragtag group.
Yeah, exactly. I think I got all 7 or 8, whatever the initial members were, and with the help of Val Peacock, who's a former hop guy from Anheuser-Busch, who's kind of been our consultant over the years, and it was John Mallett from Bell's idea to put this group together and basically be a liaison between craft brewers and growers. And you don't have to be a member to reap the benefits. We're a nonprofit, and the idea is to move forward with ideas of how to we learn from each other. That's important. But how can the growers grow a hop that's better for craft, and how can we understand what they're doing, and maybe there's some limitations. For instance, lowering the kiln temperature. Although yes, it did probably help cause hop creep. It's not the only thing that caused hop creep. I mean, I think the bigger issue of hop creep is 4 and 5 pounds of dry hops per barrel. So
yeah.
But anyway, so it's farm sanitation. You think about dry hopping, the IPAs. Very few breweries in America don't make an IPA or don't make a dry hopped beer. I mean, even Allagash, an all Belgian focused brewery, has dry hop beer, and they're the ones that exposed hop creep in modern times. So, and they're incidentally a member as well, one of the 50 members. But so farm sanitation has always been a huge focus, because when you think about the hops, they're not getting boiled; they're going to the dry hop. They're not getting boiled, and so they're coming out of the bag, whatever format, whole cone, pellet, and you're dumping them in. So you don't want those to be exposed to the elements, to animals, or whatever, bird poop. You want to make sure that the farms are don't have any birds inside their buildings and whatnot, and you'd be surprised, and so that was an early focus. And now the focus is on a breeding program, and this is the 4th year of the breeding program, and with the help of the hop breeder John Henning, who also works for the USDA, and does some breeding for them on a national scale. He's our hop breeder, and with the help of Val and with the help of all the brewers identifying a flavor or aroma that we're looking for, we're well into a breeding program, and we should have some publicly These are publicly bred hops that will be available to any hop grower anywhere, not just in the Northwest. It could be in Michigan and could be in New York, Indiana, California, wherever, that they'll be available to grow. And it's pretty exciting, and and especially coming off the pandemic, because you do have the National Hop Breeding Organization, but there's a lot of bigger breweries in there too, and so there's tends to be a mix of where the focus should be. Although you do have a lot of craft breweries in that national organization, like Sierra Nevada and whatnot is in there, and Boston Beer, Odell, and many more. But the Hop Quality Group is this focus on their hop breeding to really bring some exciting new IPA varieties to craft brewers, but then also have the ability to have these hops be available as a publicly bred hop for any grower that wants to potentially grow it.
Love it. Is there, as you're thinking about hop flavors, and in another conversation we were talking about Mosaic early on having some blueberry notes to it, which is not really something it's known for these days. Is there some sort of aroma or flavor that you have a burning passion that you'd love to see one day, or at least a deep down desire that you'd like to see one day emerge from hops, aroma or flavor wise?
Yeah, the one aroma that has enamored me for the last 7 or 8 years is from the new hop. I think it's called Talus from YCH through the hop breeding program. That was 692 was the number, and that was a hop Natalie and I were rubbing for years with Jason Peralt in his experimental field. And when it's on, it's got this beautiful pink grapefruit aroma, but it's also related to its 692 or Talus is the daughter to Sabro, which is a pretty polarizing hop. I mean, that's just like big mint and like tropical coconut and pina colada, and it can be a little abrasive in my opinion. And so there does show a little bit of that in Talus, but I would love to see more of that, like pink grapefruit. Think like a freshly squeezed pink grapefruit into a Greyhound, and I just really like that. So I'd love to see like more of that. I'm although I like the a lot of the new tropical flavors and whatnot, I do still love that old school stone fruit like that you get out of Amarillo.
Mm-hmm.
I love everything that's in Simcoe still. I'm not sure where else you can go. I mean, there's a lot of berry notes, like I mentioned, elixir in that we used a little bit in Pliny the Younger this year, has the strong strawberry note to it. There's Idaho Gem is a new variety that was bred at one of the farms in Idaho at Gooding. That's got some really nice like red cherry berry notes to it. So that seems to be where breeding is going. But there's also this focus right now in the breeding, both publicly and privately, looking at back and using like saws as a base and creating some softer notes and whatnot, because I'm not sure how much more you can go. I mean, how much bigger can you get than Citra and Mosaic? Those are really massive aromas in those beers. And although I know the consumer wants more, I just don't think the hop breeding is going to be able to get more out of that.
Well, this entire conversation has left me deeply desiring a good West Coast IPA. So I'm going to wrap it up with you here so I can go down into the basement and find one in the fridge. But Vinnie, thanks for taking the time. Thanks for giving us the insight on what Younger Day might look like next year. I imagine as soon as people get 2 shots in the arm, they'll be lining up outside and waiting for months and months and months for the experience. But thanks as always for taking the time to be on the show and to talk with me about all of this.
Well, I enjoyed it. Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on. Great to chat with you.
Well, there you have it. From Vinnie Cilurzo himself, a peek under the hood of Pliny the Elder, a look towards 2022's Younger, hops he is excited about, and how he works with his whole team to get out the best pint possible. Much like that Steal This Beer episode, this show opened up a whole new host of topics, so maybe I'll just have to have him back over there to keep this whole thing going. Stay tuned, and don't forget that new episodes of Steal This Beer come out every Monday. The BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month, and if you download this month's episode, which is February, you'll hear about quality control and a really cool nonprofit brewery in North Carolina. And also check out beeredge.com for the newsletter, articles, and episode of the Beer Edge podcast hosted by Mr. Andy Crouch. And if you're a well-meaning brewery or other company who wants to get in front of an audience to talk about beer while also supporting the journalism that we do, we could use you. Hear about our great rates from Liz Melby by reaching out to her on email at liz@beeredge.com. And I need to know, are you part of the maybe, likely, fastest growing smoked beer community on Facebook? I hope so. But if not, search for This Week in Rausch Beer on the social media platform and join our smoked malt merriment. I think that covers all the bases. So again, my thanks to Vinnie for being on the show, to you for listening and supporting us and leaving those reviews on your podcast platform of choice. I really do appreciate it. If you have questions or comments or guest suggestions for me, you can always reach me at John Holl, it's JOHNHOLL @beeredge.com, or you can follow me on social media and talk to me on Twitter at John_Holl. Nate Schweber, he plays the guitar and harmonica and arranged our theme music. Jeff Quinn put pen to paper digitally and made our logo. I'm John Holl. New episodes of this show come out every Wednesday, and that's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to think beer.